Planning an event and wondering how you can give your attendees the best experience possible? Take advantage of customized meetings with Hilton that make it easier than ever to incorporate health, wellness, and great breaks. Hilton will help you build an extraordinary meeting that attendees will remember. To book your next meeting or event, go to meetings.hilton.com.
Are you a
10, 9, 8,
Okay, so we're gonna do the ad.
Welcome to Gather Geeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Editor-in-Chief Beth Kormanik.
Hi, David.
Hey, Beth, here we are, another episode of Gather Geeks.
Our guest is Erin McGuire, who is Associate Director of Special Events at Sick Kids Foundation in Toronto. The foundation supports the Hospital for Sick Children and has a wide-ranging slate of events that target diverse donor groups. So BizBash readers may be familiar with the foundation for our coverage of its big gala every year, but we're going to hear more about the strategy that goes into planning that and other signature events as the big way the foundation rethought its messaging. So there's a lot of competition in the nonprofit world for donations, as we well know. So this conversation, David, that you had about choosing and executing a marketing strategy and event strategy is so relevant.
Yeah, no, I think it really is. And also, they're willing to take risks. How many nonprofits are willing to take risks? Their messaging is edgier than it's ever been. They are one of the touch points in Toronto where people really look up to them. They're like mentors for all the other associations, all the other nonprofits. And so we really appreciate having them on. And they do spark change, literally spark change, because they save people's lives.
Right. So the message here is be bold. Let's listen.
So, Erin, thank you for joining us on this special edition of Gather Geeks. Thank you for coming to Chibo, I think it's called.
Chibo.
It's Chibo Restaurant. What better place to do a podcast in the event world, but in a wine bar?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So we're here to talk about how events spark change.
Right.
And I can't think of another organization or another professional that has become such an expert at this. I'm going to let Alex sort of frame the conversation, and then we're going to start go in and ask you a bunch of questions.
Okay.
Sure. So as David mentioned, with the campaign being called Sparking Change, a lot of the time when we talk about an event, we might focus on the planning process that goes into it. We might focus on the day, the event itself on site, but comparatively little about what that event leads to afterwards and how to use events as a tool to spark change, to make some kind of momentum that builds and carries on past the event itself once the guests leave and go home, but then how to take that energy and turn that into something, and events being a sort of like a prime platform for just that.
So why don't we first start with a little bit about your background and how you got to Sick Kids
Foundation.
Sick Kids Foundation,
Yeah.
and what it is and how big it is. We're here in Toronto, people don't realize what a big deal this is.
Right. So, Sick Kids is really my first foray into the non-for-profit world. Before that, I've worked, I've kind of spanned the globe. I've worked back in Vancouver for the TED conference, where I kind of hit the ground running and learned everything there was about events, and then came out to Toronto and worked for Labatt, did all sorts of beer contesting, saw that side of things, worked a little while for MLSE, and had the opportunity to come to Sick Kids. And truly, I didn't know that much about the organization. So,
Well, tell us a little bit about Sick Kids and what is some of the background about it?
yeah, so it's the foundation supports the hospital, really the top priority needs of the hospital, and that's dictated by the hospital, and really it's through major gift planning, it's through events, and that's third-party events, which are run by members of Toronto that are connected to the cause and want to give back. I'm not involved in that. I'm really involved in our signature events and our partnership events, and those are either owned and operated events within the foundation. We've got a lot of control over those to get our message out there, and then our partnership events are working with an agency to create event experiences and fundraise essentially for the hospital.
What is the overall budget of the hospital that you're raising money for? Like how big? The scale is pretty big.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say what the budget for the hospital is. It's massive, I'm sure.
Right.
This past year, we had a target of 156 million to hit for our giving, to hit our financial targets, and that's a combination, as I said, of major gifts, direct and digital marketing, our different events, our corporate giving. All of that rolls up to a pretty big number, and we actually blew through that number, 159 million this year.
Really?
So,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. And sorry, it really does roll up to the campaign that we're in right now, which is fundraising towards a new hospital and continuing breakthrough research. And that's a $1.3 billion
that's
campaign.
the one. That's the big
Yeah.
number that I do remember.
Yeah.
So talk about your signature event first, and then we're going to go into your strategy.
Yeah, so we've got a few signature events. Our largest signature event is a walk. It's a march through the streets of downtown Toronto. It's called Get Loud. We hosted at the end of September, and so march through the streets of Toronto, as I said, and ends in a music festival. We had about 4,300 participants last year. And all of those proceeds go towards the hospital, which we call unrestricted giving, which is really what we're trying to raise money for, which is the hospital can then dictate where those funds go.
And you done something very different this year, and I have been talking about it to every group that I talk about, how you switched the strategy of your ask.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about this campaign that was kind of groundbreaking?
Yeah.
And how it has sparked change among your donor base?
Right. So really, we're now into our third year of that campaign, and I can't take credit for the campaign. It's really the brainchild of our marketing team and our creative agency. But we knew we were coming into this $1.3 billion campaign. We knew the need was there to build a new hospital. But we knew our message, the way it was coming out, was working, but it wasn't breaking through, as you said, to markets that were beyond those that we were already reaching. And that was truly what we needed, was to shake things up a bit. And the team came out with an incredible campaign. It's called the Versus campaign. And that launched and really shook up things because it was a very different message. It was not pulling at your heartstrings. It wasn't making you cry, which a lot of our messaging before really had done. Instead, this was about embodying a movement and joining the movement and inviting those who listened and saw to join us in this epic campaign and help us, raise a new Sick Kids.
And what is the message? Tell us what was the campaign. Walk us through what an attendee or a person in the Toronto area would be hearing.
Right. So I guess from the marketing standpoint, it was really around the versus means Sick Kids versus the greatest childhood illnesses and how we can battle those. And what that meant, the Versus platform really allowed us to get down to a personal level. So it could be anything. It could be Erin versus leukemia. It could be an event name versus their own, direct cause. And so it allowed us that flexibility to be able to speak to people on this level that they'd not really been able to connect to before. It made it personal. And it also showed, we used a lot of our patient ambassadors in the campaign, and it showed them, it was, the video itself was kind of on a battlefield and showing that we are winning this fight, but that we need to continue and that there's more to be done rather than, there are terrible things happening and we need your help. And instead it's please join us and help us beat some of these things, beat childhood cancer, beat these illnesses that still are around. But
is it fair to say that it's a little more aggressive than other
Absolutely.
things? And that do you think that the political atmosphere in the world is making it so that we're okay with more aggressive messaging?
Yes, I think that if you look at it as a business rather than a foundation, we were really taking scope of who are the key players out there and what is their messaging like. So if you look at Nike, it's not aggressive, but it's empowering and it's bold.
Right.
And so that was the take that we wanted to move towards, rather than pulling on the heartstrings, instead being bold and saying the things that people don't want to hear, and reaching a new audience through that.
And you did reach a new audience.
Absolutely.
And how did it change your events at all? How did you use that in your events to portray this new campaign?
Yeah, it's worked very well. Actually, our walk event that I mentioned earlier, Get Loud, for years we had done it. It was called the Great Camp Adventure Walk. And we'd found
so Get Loud was the actual epitome of the execution of the campaign.
No, Get Loud was our signature event.
Right, but the messaging in that Get Loud
was part of the campaign. Absolutely.
Of the campaign.
So when we had this, it was already a large event. We had 3,000 walkers, but we kind of plateaued. We saw the ability to tap into this amazing campaign and leverage it for our event. We rebranded it to Get Loud. Already the name, it speaks about coming out, getting loud, talking about sick kids, talking about the need. And all of our visuals, we had different fundraising kind of thresholds that you needed to reach. One of them was a versus flag, and it was all about coming to the streets of Toronto and getting loud and taking your personal verses out into the city.
So you gamified it a bit.
Yeah, well, we wanted to make the event more accessible. Really, it was the Great Camp Adventure Walk, like the name kind of describes. It was a camp-themed event. It was very much a family event, and families are important. Absolutely, we're a children's hospital. We need to keep that family component, but we needed to broaden our horizons and also make it interesting for millennials, make it interesting for people without children, and so bringing this Get Loud spin to it made it, it's a cool campaign. People want to be a part of it because it is cool. It's kind of like the Nike effect, right? Like you are interested and you're engaged and you want to find out more.
Did the year one build on year two, which was building on year three? Did you?
So we are going into year two in September this year.
Is just year two.
Yeah, so
and
absolutely.
The concert itself, is it edgier? Is it different?
We're still Children's Hospital, so we're not trying to get too edgy.
Yeah.
We had Bare Naked Ladies as our headliner last year. This year we've got Serena Ryder, another great Canadian artist. So it's that balance, right? We want to shake things up. We want to break through the noise, but we don't want to alienate our current donor base either. So it's that kind of balance, that delicate balance to make sure that everybody's happy.
And do you find that with this shift in messaging, that also sort of leads to a shift in demographic of who you are targeting most directly with your events, for example, like how the guest list looks or how it looks of who you expect to come out and engage with this?
Yeah, we have definitely at Get Loud, our demographic has maybe not shifted. I think we've kept that core contingent quite well, which is great. We wanted to keep them, but it has opened it up to, let's say the 17 to 30-year-olds that we weren't getting before, that had the propensity to be involved in a nonprofit event, but it just didn't really appeal before. So we've seen it, but it's not been at the loss of other donors.
And what other events are you doing that have this sort of using the campaign?
Yeah, well, we've really tried to bring that campaign into all of our events. We've got 3 other signature events. One is a bubble hockey tournament, so kind of like table hockey style. We run it. It's targeted at the Bay Street crowd and construction crew.
Tell us who. For people who are not in Toronto, what is the Bay Street crowd?
The Bay Street crowd. Okay, I don't know the equivalent, like the Wall Street crowd.
Oh, okay.
With the financial crew.
People. Okay.
Yeah, and this is really something that it's, I wouldn't say 100%, but more predominantly males. That was a target audience we didn't have before. We created this event. This I think was our 4th year, so 4 years ago, and that was to answer that need. But coming into the campaign that was 3 years ago, we've been able to bring in. We show the campaign video, and what's incredible is we've had a real issue in the past with people not paying attention. Right? It's an event. People are coming. They've paid their ticket. It's going to a good cause, but they're there to have a good time. And so we've shown this campaign video normally right before we want to have our speaking remarks. And it's been able, because it is such a disruptive video, it's really been able to get people's attention and get them to stop talking, which has been an incredible feat. And certainly our previous videos or our campaigns wouldn't have had that same effect.
And so what are the others?
So that's Bubble Hockey Night for sick kids. We've got Glitter, which just happened at the end of April.
What is Glitter?
Glitter is a black tie food and gambling event that's targeted at the Toronto Chinese community. So it's one of our, it's part of our Chinese initiative, and looking at that community within Toronto and kind of building that event. We've again used our Versus video in that. And another event, it's not a seated dinner, it's more food stations, all sorts of different activities. We've got blackjack and poker. We've also got, the normal activities that you have, but not where you've got people essentially captive at a table where you can make them pay attention. So that video has worked.
Is that cultural? Is the Chinese people event very different than other events? Or are you looking at the community and the cultural side of this?
I think we definitely, the difference really is we do things in language as well. So that's a big change from our other events. We've also, my colleague Connie at the foundation is my lifeline into that community to make sure that we are being appropriate, culturally sensitive,
And it's a huge community in Toronto.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is one of the most diverse communities in the world.
Yeah.
From a city perspective.
Absolutely.
I actually think it's even more diverse than New York City.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, we've got so many different communities in Toronto. It's a wonderful city for that. And this was really our first foray into targeting a specific community and building an initiative around it. It's not just our event. We've got direct and digital marketing and community events, really with that support within language is a big piece. And it's done very well for us. It's a heck of a lot of fun. There's nonstop food and entertainment on the stage. And then where we've been able to weave in that campaign is through that video when we need to capture attention and get eyes on the stage.
And what are the other? Let's say we have Glitter.
Yeah, we've got Glitter, Bubble Hockey Night for sick kids, Get Loud, and then Scrubs in the City, which is our next event coming up. That's going to be June 6th. It's at Evergreen Brickworks, which I'd say is really the coolest raw space that you can find in Toronto. It's right in the Don Valley, so it's kind of in the green space, and it is an old brick factory that they've cleared out, and we have, Scrubs is going into its 18th year, but it's a big party, really, a fabulous event. We've got a very engaged committee that goes out and secures sponsorship and lounge sales. But once you get there, every year's a city theme, at least for the past few years. This year will be Rio. And we've got a lot of the standards, the silent auction and raffle ticket sales. But once people come in, it's our job to make sure they know about those things, but they're not getting in the way of them having a good time.
And how do you get new people to these events? Like, what is other than these campaigns? I mean, that's the campaign is the strategy piece.
Yes.
But what are the tactical things that you do to get new people?
I guess we do rely on our committees. We've got Glitter and Scrubs both have their own committee. And so if we've got that need to bring in new people, we would rely on them. Glitter is still in the growth phase. We had a little over 500. Scrubs, we sold out 5 weeks in advance. So it's not necessarily about finding new people, but making sure we've got the right people in the room. Really, again, we rely on our committee. We don't have huge marketing budgets to put out campaigns into the market. Instead, it's word of mouth, relying on collecting the right information on site, utilizing that data when we launch again to be able to target people with emails and anything that, we're a charity, right? We've got to keep our cost per dollar at mind always and make sure that we're leveraging the volunteer committee, our own marketing team to help us use those skills without having to tap into too much in terms of funds.
And how do you judge how to do a new event, or is that a risk, or what is the process that you do?
That is always a risk, and I think I've not gotten into our partnership events yet, but we do have. The signature events are the ones I've worked on for the longest, so they're nearest and dearest to my heart. But what we do yearly is, we're very fastidious in our fiscal planning. We're held very tightly to our numbers, and so we are asked by our senior management team to report on what the next 5 years looks like when we go into planning. And so we need to look at the life cycle of each of our events, look at who we're targeting, because what we don't want to do is continue going back to the same well, because, these are people that are warm to sick kids, but after a while, the well's going to run dry. And so it's Bubble hockey is a perfect example of that we created that event 4 years ago to tap into a market that we didn't have before. So Scrubs really is fashion crowd. We have no problem selling out at this point. Glitter, very targeted demographic. Get Loud is our walk event, so families and people of all ages. So we're looking at, well, who have we not tapped into yet? The millennials, that's a big one everybody likes talking about, but it's about how do we speak to them properly? How do we get them engaged?
And what is the issue with that? Why haven't you done an event?
I think that, I fall into the millennial category. You think about the things that we're competing against. Because if you look at the demographic of the rest of our events, they skew older and not significantly, but they've got more disposable income. They can spend money on things like event tickets and silent auction items and raffle tickets, and that's who we want in the room for those events.
We're going to take a little break and come right back after this message from Hilton. So when's the big event? Hilton's here for planners with their exclusive customized meetings. Become a wow maker and save time by letting Hilton help you present an extraordinary event, one that leads to memorable and meaningful connections. Visit meetings.hilton.com and let Hilton help you. It's interesting to discuss what you as a millennial will give money to, and how do millennials, I hate to use that word because they hate it. Yeah. But how do certain demographics feel philanthropic today? Is it because there are brands that people will not buy because they're not doing the right thing? So where is that sort of magic? Alex, you fall into this area too.
Certainly do.
Why wouldn't you give money to sick kids as a philanthropic endeavor, or what kind of event would you go to? Yeah. Let's brainstorm a little bit. Yeah. What would you do?
I mean, I think an angle of it comes down to, and I think this ties back into marketing a lot, is the sensation that it's about the cause, yes, but it's also about the middleman in this case of the organization, and feeling like, okay, if I'm giving my money to this organization in order to help a cause, is this the best way I can be helping that cause? Because does the organization feel like it's thinking about it in a similar way that I might be thinking about it? Is it, there are a lot of ways to build a fence. There are a lot of ways to solve issues. So even if I might be aligned with an organization by trying to solve an issue or, remedy some kind of issue in the world, I want to also feel like they're coming at it from an equivalent way that understands my viewpoint in order to endorse that.
Well, you don't have, if you're going after millennials, now they're having children, but if you don't have children, are you interested in sick kids as much?
Yeah, I think it really is, if we looked at our donor database, there is absolutely a correlation between people who have a connection to the hospital, be that a direct connection or, a neighbor or a friend, or so that's a big player. I think education of how we're spending those dollars, where the money is going. We try to be very open about that, and we're not hiding anything. There's events take money. We're putting this event on. Here's where the funds are being directed to. Here's what you get coming, and then here's what we're ultimately with our net proceeds putting the money towards. So I think it's about how we speak to them. How do we find that market and then understand what their drivers are and speak to them in a way that they're ready to hear it? Because I think millennials, especially the ones having kids, that they have even more limited funds. So if they aren't directly connected to the hospital or have that need, the propensity to give goes down.
Right.
And so I like to engage in nonprofit events. For the most part, the ones I've done are peer-to-peer fundraising, where I can reach out to my own market and, my own contacts, get them to fundraise or raise money, and I can reach a combined goal. For me, I want to have something to say I'm doing. The last time I did it was doing the Ride to Conquer Cancer. That's something you're taking on a significant personal investment in doing something. So I don't know. I could be different from the next one.
What do you think, Alex? I'm actually, this is a laboratory.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think it really is about speaking the right language, and in that sense, if I am then going to go and try and rally support from my community and from my network to, exactly, have it in translatable terms that I can take back and not feel like I'm necessarily, being a mouthpiece for something that I don't fully grasp on that level. But I think there is, especially with the greater millennial generation, if we can call it that.
Greater millennials. And what about Gen Zs?
Tack them on too. But that it is, the point at least I think is that it is about education in a lot of ways. I think you're exactly right, that it's equipping someone with the information so that they feel like it's not just they're being told to do something, or we're not just being told to do something, but we understand why we should be doing that thing, so we can then rally others to the same cause and spark change for that.
Yeah, and understanding how how they want to hear it, how they want to receive it. Is it an email rather than a phone call?
What is it? How do you want to hear it?
From what we understand, I mean, I would never take a phone call in the middle of work.
Yeah.
I'd potentially read an email, but Lord, you get so many of those,
Okay.
So it's probably from my personal network, somebody reaching out and telling me about it.
I think I see Alex shaking his head too.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, I mean, I think it comes back to one of those marketing rules of thumb of do things that are interesting and people will talk about them.
Exactly.
So the more interesting things that you're doing, the more you're likely to be able to break through that into that kind of like attention economy and actually get some of that very valuable time that people find so precious. That also leads to a question I have, I think, more on the organizational side again, which is we've spoken of limited budgets on the millennial side, but also just on an organizational side. How do you build in experimentation and diversifying in your workflow, basically, when the budget can be so dear?
Well, I think we are very lucky. I mean, particularly here in Toronto, to have a recognizable brand name and a hospital that has touched so many that we've got wonderful vendors who are willing to go above and beyond for us. So what that means is we've got a budget that is set out at the onset. We then get a significant amount of discounts from that point, which allows us that flexibility to try something new. I think that we wouldn't try multiple things. I mean, you've got a certain rhythm that works, and you never want to be stale. You always want to be creating new experiences. I want people to walk out of my event and say, wow, that was so cool. Or, I can look the next day and see if we were trending and if there's great pictures that were shared, and that message is spreading that way as well.
Do you have a big social media following? When you see trending, is that?
Well, I know that Get Loud.
What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, social media is probably not my particular forte, but I do know Get Loud particularly, when we have so many people en masse, we've been able to trend, and that just means that we're the top of the list of things that are being tweeted out or being posted, shared on Instagram. So that's exciting to hear.
We've asked this question a number of times. Does social media translate to contributions? Does it convert?
That's
like everybody has this.
I
don't know.
$1 million question.
It's a totally different department.
It's a different department, but does it? It still is. If it impacts your world, it would be a tool that you would be involved in. And we're hearing over and over again that a lot of times social media does not convert.
Well, I do know that we have amazing sponsors as well that are secured by our corporate team. And they make our events. Really, if you looked at just the funds that we raised, sponsorship is about half of that. I know at the end of each event, it's very important in the way that we steward these sponsors, just as we would steward our donors. And we've got a post-event report that includes a snapshot of the media impressions. And those sponsors we need back next year, or we need that information to be able to pitch new sponsors the following year.
Leads me to a question about how you deal with the VIP experience for sponsors. Do you have a whole team of people that do nothing but focus on those sponsors?
Let's not just say the VIP sponsors. We certainly have my colleague, two colleagues on my team are dedicated to sponsorship, and they are kind of the go-between the events team and the corporate team. Once a sponsor's been secured to come over, I work closely with them on the whole experience leading up to, and certainly, we've got our top tier sponsors that we offer more. That's really just a part of giving more, that you get better benefits. But absolutely, there's a very dedicated team that works with those sponsors to ensure that they're happy right from the moment that they sign on to post-event.
Right. The other I guess one of the last questions I want to ask is, we talk about sparking change. One of the things that I've learned about events is that when you create an event and create a deadline, you spark change in an entire organization. Is that an accurate statement for you? Do you see people be mobilized because you're having that event everywhere in your hospital and your foundation? Do you see it really having an impact in terms of the mobilization aspect of it?
Yeah, I think probably the one we see the most doing that is Get Loud. And it is our largest event and it appeals to the largest crowd, but absolutely, it's also the one that connects most to our new campaign. And that is the one that we see, we've got this all-in mentality, and it's something that is communicated across the board that we want every person in the foundation to be all in. We want the hospital to be all in. And that really just means that you're engaging with this event in some way. You're donating to your colleague who's going to walk. You're walking yourself. You're volunteering for the event. You're securing sponsors for it. You're all in. And that is something we see over at the hospital too. We get a contingent of hospital employees, whether they're doctors or nurses or
so it does.
Research.
It mobilizes.
Absolutely.
What is your process for doing the postmortem? Would you physically get together in a room? Do you look at surveys? What is your postmortem process?
Yeah, I think it depends on the scale of the event. Get Loud being our largest, we certainly have the most rigor around in terms of doing post-event surveys, research, that kind of thing. But right down to our smallest event, we will do debrief meetings with our vendors. We ask each of the different teams. We work with marketing and finance, sponsorship. We want them to do their own debriefs. And then each of our events has a core team that has representatives from each of those departments. We come together and share that information and we capture it. And then we refer back to that information when we're planning next year, because that would be our downfall if we're hearing this feedback and we're not actually putting it to good use.
And is it usually something different every year?
The feedback?
Hopefully. No, the negatives turn into positives.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's the best part. Like, no event is ever going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And so it's that tweaking and understanding where were the pinch points this year. And yeah, I'd say if it was a reoccurring problem, then I've got a problem.
How do you get to $159 million?
Exactly.
$159 million, which is that's a large campaign, even for us cynical people. Yeah. That's a large campaign.
Yeah, the 159 this year and the 1.3 billion.
1.3 billion. Let us know how you're doing on that.
Yeah, I think we're over 800 million at this point.
Really?
So, yeah.
So it all goes to, wow, that's incredible.
We are getting there, but we've got more to go. And so we're continuing to rally and spread the message. And the nice thing is that we really see, it's not just the city of Toronto, it's the greater Toronto area and beyond in Ontario, people answering the cry and coming in and raising dollars.
Right. Well, the Sick Kids Hospital is at the heart of this area of Toronto.
I'd say it's at the heart of Ontario. And it's really the leading children's hospital in Canada. We've got wonderful hospitals across the country as well. But the really acute needs are served at Sick Kids.
Do you know, events, if you look at sort of the history of events, some of the most groundbreaking things happen with hospitals and events because they have for centuries had to create patrons. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's something that we have not studied enough, the idea of fundraising and events and things that make people want to rally around their hospitals.
Yeah. Well, this whole idea of sparking change, when you told me about it, I thought that's kind of our directive at every event. We need to be sparking change because the need is out there. And if we're not, then there's no way we're going to be raising that money and meeting our goals. Change is what's needed.
That's right. Alex, you want to take us to the end here?
Sure. So just writing off that last point, I would say on a personal level, with your own gut feeling, what kind of feedback is it or what kind of response is it that you see that makes you know that was a success, that is sparking change?
Yeah. It's a good one. I mean, really, it's the long-term and the short-term and the long-term results. If we hit our goals, if we greatly exceed our goals, that's one big thing. If I can see collecting the feedback from our sponsors, from our guests, from our volunteers, from all of those involved, if we get that great feedback and they want to come back, they want to return next year, that means to me that we've hit the mark. And, if we're selling out the event, if the event is increasing year over year, we should never be going backwards or kind of with camp where we're staying static, we knew something needed to change. And so we did it.
What happens at the end of a night that makes you feel it? Let's do the Maya Angelou thing.
That makes me feel it when everybody walks out the door and I get to start tearing everything down. No, at the end of the night, there's always that peak moment in the event, and it's not the end of the night. Oh. It's when you know that everything has come together. You've got that moment where you're speaking to people and they're paying attention. It's like almost the climax of the event when you get that feeling in the room, the eyes are on the stage, people are listening. That's when I know it's worked. And it doesn't always work. But when that happens, and then, the event starts to peter out, there's the diehards that stick around. But
do you think that, and I was at an event last week for James Beard Awards.
Amazing.
And you feel the energy in a room. Is that something that I was just imagining, or do you feel it when you're in one of your events?
Yeah, well, I think that's what I mean, where I feel that when it's that moment that's where, everybody's there, everybody's having fun, things are running smoothly, right. People are happy, we know we've hit our goal already. That's really the ideal.
That's your moment.
We've that the funds have been raised, and now we're just into,
You can party.
Yeah, well, I mean, I party when everybody leaves.
Well, on that note, we're over. The evening's over. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
We will keep track of your campaign.
Awesome. I hope so.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Erin.
So, David, thank you for that conversation. I really hope it's useful for our listeners to hear how the foundation uses specifically crafted events as a way to reach all demographics. They're asking themselves, who have we not tapped into yet? And then creating an event to meet that group.
What I love about talking to specific organizations like this is for other people to sort of understand from a case study perspective what they can do with their own organizations, even if they're not a nonprofit, if they're a for-profit corporation or if they are an association. All these tactics work and everything is morphing together. So, Beth, what is going on at BizBash?
We're less than 1 month out from BizBash Live Los Angeles. Join us July 24th at the California Market Center for a program that includes a lineup of inspiring speakers, an exhibit hall full of event suppliers and venues, a networking lunch, and more. And we're following that up the very next week, driving our events team crazy, with an East Coast event in Washington, D.C. So we're gathering for what we're calling a pop-up event July 31st at the Ronald Reagan Building. So you can learn more about both events at bizbashlive.com.
Fantastic. And before we end, we like to thank the people that bring this podcast to you. Claire Hoffman, our wonderful editorial director of the podcast, and Rebecca Pappas, who distributes it to all the people and all the channels, and to Dave Nelson, who is our producer. So thank you all for making this podcast possible. And of course, we thank you for listening to us and for recommending us on the comment section of the podcast, of the iTunes section. Or whatever podcasting you listen to.
Wherever you're listening to this.
Yes,
we appreciate the reviews and comments.
Absolutely. And they're really fantastic. So, Beth, what do we say at the end of this?
Gather on.
So gather on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the Gather Geeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter @GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of Gather Geeks. Until then, gather on.